When it comes to the DC versus Marvel debate, this thing has been going on for quite a while now, and it was especially around the time of BVS and Suicide Squad. And having participated in it quite a lot of the occasions over the mentioned periods of time, now I have come to the realization that this thing never actually made sense in the first place. And today I'm going to lead you through my line of thinking regarding the topic and why it never actually made any sense to compare the two cinematic universes, film franchises, however you want to call it. But to start things off, I would like to introduce to you what the DC and Warner Brothers movies are or started off as. These films have always been these filmmaker and artist driven films, hence the whole Snyder Cut movement, as mainly it was for the injustice done to Zack Snyder and his artistic integrity and how he was swept under the rug basically with his movie. But it kind of started off with the first Superman movie, of course directed by Richard Donner, and it completely revolutionized how we look at movies in general. And when it came to the character of Batman, Tim Burton's 1989 Batman again revolutionized and introduced the character in a way that he was accepted by the fans, and it was driven by a young filmmaker at the time, of course, that being Tim Burton. And when it came to the Dark Knight trilogy, that was of course spearheaded by the vision and the visionary Christopher Nolan himself. But after that, we had Man of Steel, which started off Zack Snyder's 5-movie arc, and these things were so stark and contrasting interpretations of these characters. These were things that we have not seen before, and this is why it is so utterly important. And this is what you have to remember about DC films in general, is that they were mostly films that we have not seen before. Mainly referring to the filmmaker driven was a director attached to it who had a vision regarding the films. And when it comes to the Marvel film franchise, the Marvel film franchise, or the MCU, Marvel Cinematic Universe, started off in phase 1 with these rather filmmaker driven films, and therefore they were unique takes. And this is why people, even watching those films today, get much more enjoyment and a much more different experience than watching the newer movies nowadays. As if you watch the first Iron Man movie or the first Captain America movie or even the first Thor movie, they had a clear direction which they wanted to take. They weren't necessarily perfectly executed in a sense, but they actually wanted to tell a story of their own. But after the success of Guardians of the Galaxy's comedic approach, you noticed a tonal shift with every Marvel movie, in a sense that every film was basically turning to this comedy-filled adventure. After that, it was just basically a rinse and repeat when it comes to those films, as they were completely just devoid of identity. And some movies even thrown out the continuity without care. I'm looking at you, Thor Ragnarok. As the audience didn't necessarily care about those very things, even though the whole universe is built upon this continuity and just building into a larger story, even though they did a lot of this like retconning and stuff like that because they made sense financially and therefore they did it. They didn't really care about artistic integrity or any of that, and they could get away with it due to the short attention spans of the general audience nowadays. And this kind of falls into the category of half-assing the themes and the ideas. I'm mainly thinking about Thanos here, as he was built up as this guy with a plan, guy with a vision. In Infinity War, he said that the resources are finite and therefore I have to do this, I'm doing good. But the problem with that is that they have built up the character in a certain way, but in next movie, what would have been the logical thing to do, the logical thing to follow up that movie, is that the Avengers, the good guys, prove Thanos wrong. Thanos' ideological thinking wrong, that you are not right, killing half of the population of Earth is not a good thing to do, it's not the right thing to do because humans are resourceful, we can create infinite energy sources, blah blah blah. But it was just turned into this kind of a nostalgia fest in order to make as much money as possible and not to take any risks. It's the safe safest movie out there because it just appeals to nostalgia. And this could of course be done with the audiences because they don't really care about it. They just want to have a fun experience, and this can of course be due to the short attention span that people nowadays have. And there was absolutely no backlash regarding this thing, even though when you think about the other cinematic universe or film franchise, the exact same thing was done with Justice League back in 2017. But BVS built up this huge idea of Steppenwolf or even Darkseid coming to Earth, and a lot of connections and what could happen, and you could logically make conclusions what would happen based on the facts and the lore presented in the previous films, but they threw the whole thing out because they wanted to make money. And this is exactly the thing that the Avengers did as well with over their Marvel, but they got no backlash for it. And with the fans of DC, they are very, very attentive when it comes to details in general, and they have noticed it the first time. I know I did. This could show you that even though one universe is so concerned and pushing this narrative that their movies are so connected, but they don't really care about if something goes against the lore. But over on the DC side, people do care when things go wrong, or they don't care about the lore, or they don't respect what the artists have created. And with this notion, the Marvel movies now have become predictable and unforgettable experiences. They are basically 2-hour-long advertisements for the next Avengers film, as you can just basically watch the Avengers movies, like the 4 Avengers movies, and not really miss out on anything substantial from the Marvel universe in general. I know this is what I did. I did not even watch Avengers Age of Ultron like fully. I just watched like an hour of it or 40 minutes, and I turned it off because I thought it was really boring and the pacing was terrible. And I didn't really miss out on a lot because I could still understand mostly everything from the new movies like Infinity War and Endgame. These are just nowadays theme park films, as Martin Scorsese have alluded to them. And one of the main strategies behind the Marvel Cinematic Universe is that they hire unknown directors. As for the reason is they are easier to control, as for them, directing a big budget Marvel movie is just basically a job. It's not necessarily a passion project or anything. And due to the strict adherence of the continuity, their creative freedom is, again, insanely limited. And if you don't believe me on that, I will link an interview with Jared Marantz, I hope I'm pronouncing his name right. He drew concept art for Thanos for Infinity War, and the directors wanted a certain warrior look for the character that they really liked, but Kevin Feige, of course, the executive producer, said no and vetoed the decision because that would have been a risk to take to make him this kind of warrior character, and instead they went with a different design. But then again, within Marvel, filmmakers have very little or no creative control over the projects, as it was kind of evident by the firing of Edgar Wright from Ant-Man, of course, and the recent firing with Scott Derrickson, as he was known for his horror work prior to directing the first Doctor Strange movie, and he wanted to take the new Doctor Strange movie into this gothic horror type of adventure. But then again, due to creative differences, he couldn't do it, as creativity and just making art in general is a risk. And when it comes to Disney and especially Marvel, this is not just a risk on its own, but a financial risk. And they are not willing to take these risks, as the films are made by marketing executives, not by artists themselves. These films are corporate products. You just have fun with it for 2 hours, but then after you exit the cinema, you just forget about the experience. It just washes over you. You don't even have to pay attention to it. And my main argument when it comes to that is, if they really cared about certain characters, I'm thinking about Iron Man, Captain America, and especially the story, they would have killed these characters off at the points when the story needed it the most. But then again, when it comes to the killing of these very profitable characters, it is a financial risk which these big franchises are not willing to take. What comes into my mind is when Zack Snyder revealed that Batman was going to sacrifice himself in Justice League 2, and he would have killed the character off because he would have concluded his arc. But when you contrast that whole thing with DC films in general, where if not for the filmmakers and their risks, characters such as Batman and Superman will basically be dead as far as their cinematic presence is concerned. As when you think about it, back with Batman and Robin, that whole movie was panned critically, it was a financial disaster, and it has basically tanked the Batman franchise. But there was this guy called Christopher Nolan who wanted to reinterpret the character and make him more realistic, make him more relatable in a sense, abandoning all that camp and humor. And he successfully relaunched the Batman brand in and of itself. And when it came to Superman Returns, that was of course very received by critics, but it didn't bring anything new to the table and it wasn't really successful financially. And therefore there was no sequel developed for the movie itself, because it was this hodgepodge of a movie. It was rather a continuation of the Christopher Reeves movies, which people didn't want to see. And it was evident by the financial result, but when it came to Man of Steel with Zack Snyder and Christopher Nolan producing the movie, they really wanted to take the character in a way where people would relate to that. It was a financial success, and therefore they successfully reintroduced the character to modern audiences with their risk-taking, as still Man of Steel and the follow-up Batman v Superman is for some reason highly controversial, even though they are not really controversial in and of themselves. But to sum this whole argument up, basically, I feel like that the Marvel Cinematic Universe is the epitome of this corporate franchise with little or no artistic integrity attached to it. Whereas with DC films, the franchise has always been known for their unique and different interpretations of these characters, made by artists who want to tell a story in the first place, rather than giving the audience exactly what they want in order to maximize their profits in the short term, while sacrificing artistic integrity in the long run. Thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you have enjoyed it. If you did, please leave a like, and I would love to know all of your thoughts in the comments down below regarding the topic. Do you agree with what I've said? Do you disagree? If you're looking for content like this, subscribe for more, and I will see you in the next one. And until then, remember to keep it insightful.